Okay, so let's say you're living in California over here, and there's this vote going on in Washington way over here. And the vote's going to be on something that you care about, something simple. Say, for example, let's vote to paint every government building in the United States green. So there's a single vote that is happening tomorrow, and you want to make sure that your opinion is expressed all the way over here. Well, clearly you could pay, get on a plane, and fly this great distance, but you can see that for a number of folks who are voting on this particular issue, maybe that starts to get too expensive or inconvenient based on their daily activities. For example, you over here, you might miss a day of work, not be able to afford the flight, etc. So would it be great if you could still somehow have your vote accepted over here? Well, there's a number of ways to do it, but one of the ways it's talked about often in the literature is this idea of a delegate. So you contact some individual who might already be over here, and he or she becomes your delegate. And a delegate is not dissimilar to a puppet. They are someone who's going to vote exactly the way that you want them to vote. So I'm over here, I delegate this person to vote for me, and this person walks in and casts my vote. I want all the government buildings in the United States to be painted green, and he walks in and he makes that vote. Well, what happens if things get a little more complex and we're really thinking about a rainbow of possible votes? So instead of painting every government building green, we're now going to go and look at particular government buildings and decide what color we're going to paint them. So today, the folks over here in Washington are going to consider a public school building in the middle of the country in Ohio. And the vote is going to be on what color we should paint that building. And, well, you might be able to think about it and follow what they're talking about and tell your delegate, yeah, well, we should vote to paint that pink. Okay? And then next day, perhaps it's on the Passport Building in Philadelphia on Chestnut Street, and what color we're going to paint that. And you've decided, well, maybe we should paint that building yellow. Okay? And so you tell your delegate that. And you can see that suddenly we're running into some problems, because if we're really considering all government buildings, there might be 1 million of them in the country. Well, now you're starting to talk about a serious loss of your time. So now you have to consider each of these buildings and communicate with your delegate each of the individual votes that you would like, and then your delegate goes in and votes. So 1 million buildings, maybe over the course of a couple of years, you're starting to talk a serious loss of time in your day, as well as this delegate over here who also needs to make some salary for spending all his time going and voting for you. And so you're losing time and money just thinking about all the possible colors. Well, there's another way to go with this, and it's the other common way. So remember, delegate is one major way, and that's the puppet approach. The other is a trustee approach, and some folks will call that the Pied Piper. So trustee is exactly that. It's someone you actually trust to vote the way that you might be voting anyways. So say on a trip to Washington, you meet this wonderful individual, and you get to talking about the colors of buildings, etc. And you guys find that you have a lot in common. Every time you talk about specific buildings, you agree with the color choices that are made. Well, now you sit here and think, I could save a lot of time and money by just giving this person the ability to vote for me. I trust them to make decisions for me. Therefore, it's called a trustee, or it's a bit like a Pied Piper because he's kind of leading instead of following. You're no longer pulling the strings on him. He's walking in, making up his mind, and making votes that you think might jive with what you've always been thinking. Now let's take a closer look at this problem through the lens of transparency. Okay, so if we've got our delegate right here, and we've got our trustee over here, we see that our motives with respect to transparency are quite different. Our delegate is not someone we necessarily have any trust in. So every vote that they make, we're going to want it to be an open vote, or as Congress might call it, a roll call vote or a transparent vote. We'll want some way of establishing that this person in Washington voted the way we want. With our trustee, this is a completely different situation, because this is someone whose opinion we actually respect. Somehow we got to know them, and we might even consider that their eye for judging the color of a building might even be better than ours. Whenever they made a choice, we actually kind of respected it more. Maybe they had spent more time studying colors and how colors work on buildings, and whenever they made a choice, we kind of felt like it was the right thing. So here, we don't care if the vote is secret or open. But what's interesting here is if we go with this delegate method, remember when we were talking about the massive increase, the amount of votes and decisions the delegate might have to make, we started looking at this very expensive time cost. It's very difficult for me in California doing my regular job to start to make decisions on the color of every government building. So it's very difficult for me to turn to my delegate and keep them up to date on every one of perhaps thousands of votes a year. So suddenly you can see why I'd really like to have a trustee model if the vote numbers were increasing. So numbers of decisions decisions and votes affects my decision. So as the number of votes per year go up, the more likely I'm going to seek out and wish I could find a trustee. But as there are a very small number of votes, maybe up to 100 votes a year, I'm still okay with having a delegate. Then I don't have to worry about trying to find someone I trust, which is not so easy in itself. But again, this idea of a trustee is really interesting because now I'm looking to someone who might even understand the problems of coloration better than me. We think of this trustee person as someone who thinks like me, but might even be better at making decisions for the specific challenges that matter to me. So what's interesting though is if I try and maintain this delegate relationship, again, I've got this issue where I've got to make sure that all the votes that they make are open and transparent. He's over here in Washington, I'm over here in California, and so I'm going to have to insist that those votes somehow get published. But the second those votes get published, they can now be seen by everyone on Earth. So again, this issue of transparency gets locked in with this whole concept of numbers of decisions and votes. Because if the vote is published and there's only one vote being made, say to turn all the government buildings green, well, I can look at the published vote and verify that my delegate has done exactly what I wanted him to do. But as those numbers start to increase into hundreds a day, I don't even have time to make decisions on those buildings myself. I have no idea what color the building in Peoria should be until I look at the background and study the environment and decide what color I want that building to be. But here, I've now delegated my responsibility for this person to vote on something that I haven't followed at all. So even if the vote is published and public, it really doesn't matter because for me, I haven't even formulated my thoughts on that yet. So I've now hired this person who I don't really trust, who I don't really think has a good sense for coloration, and they're going to be forced to make decisions just because I am too busy. So again, if the number of votes increases dramatically, even if I publish every single vote, it really doesn't help me that much. I really have no choice but to find myself a trustee. But the other thing, and the really terrible thing that happens here is, as these votes are getting published, as they're made transparent, as the number of votes increases, well, certain individuals become more and more convinced there's no way that I could possibly track every one of these votes. And so now I have this delegate in office who's basically got all these free votes, okay? Because I can't possibly care about all these votes. He doesn't care perhaps. And so someone who might be interested in how the color of this building in Peoria works might be able to somehow nudge this delegate in the direction that they want, okay? And this person you could call a special interest. And this person can really do one of two things in order to nudge this person in the right direction. They could pay them, which is a form of bribery, or they could intimidate them. And I've always said that intimidation is much more powerful. You get much more bang for the buck, but we're not going to talk about that here. These are the two methods, 1 and 2, that this person can now use to push this person. And the beautiful thing is we've got delegates. So we've insisted for the votes to be public because we don't trust this guy in the first place. And so now that the votes are public, well, we're not the only one who can now monitor our delegates. All these special interests can as well. And so they'll see if their bribery money or their intimidation is paying off, and they'll be willing to pay more because they can now verify that this delegate has voted the way they want to. So as soon as you have public and transparent votes and you have a lot of votes going on, well, you end up with a delegate who's open to anybody on earth to make decisions on specific votes. Certainly if it's clear that the public or the people who are hiring this delegate are not following all the votes. And as the number increases, thousands, 2,000s a year, this becomes apparent. It is a rare person who's got time to even follow 1 or 2 extra things a day, much less 5, 10, 15, 20 extra votes a day, especially as these particular votes get much more complex than just the color of a building in Peoria. Imagine now if these particular votes had to do with tax code or weapons purchases. And the bills being proposed and the amendments being proposed are insanely complex, highly coded legislative language. So the time for any single individual to follow even 10 of these votes a year might not be enough.